We have chosen a rather interesting subject, which was probably more familiar 100 years ago than it is today. But in those times, the approach was quite different. And we have certain knowledge and understanding which was not available to our ancestors. About the year 1380, there was born in a little town called Kempen near Dusseldorf in Germany, one Thomas, who became known as Thomas of Kempen, or later Thomas à Kempis. Fortunately, we have some biographical information about Thomas. And we know that for his time he enjoyed extraordinary longevity. He died in 1471 at the age of 91 years. And to make that in the 15th century was rather good, especially without benefit of vitamins and other helpful elements. One of the reasons possibly why Thomas à Kempis lived so long was that he lived so quietly. Of his 91 years, he spent over 70 in a cloister. As a result, he is often described as one of the most unworldly of mortals. He had almost no contact with the ordinary, everyday life of working, struggling, striving persons. However, in his day, the German monastic system was still rather sketchy, and the little monastery of St. Agnes, of the order of St. Augustine, was one of the poor monasteries. It was up to the brethren of this group to find their own way in life, and to find such means as they could to survive and preserve their institution. This they accomplished by gaining wide recognition as copyists of manuscripts. They copied all kinds of documents and papers for illiterate princes, rulers. Kempis himself actually made one complete copy or transcription of the entire Bible. These brothers, therefore, by supplying books, psalmisters, antiphonals, and other necessary parts of the religious life of the times, managed to maintain their way of life. Of these copyists, Thomas à Kempis was one of the best. He worked with the quiet, careful way of the detached religious person of his time. In many instances, he signed his copies as copyist. He certainly made no effort or had no intention of claiming any particular credit other than the fact that he made these copies. During this long life also, he wrote a number of books. Most of these books were as unworldly as his own career. And the majority of his little tracts and productions were in the strange, cramped style of a copyist. He wrote brief essays on the conduct of monks, on the regulation of a monastery, and on such subjects as keeping its gardens in order and the buildings in repair. He was advanced to prior at one time, but found this too much of a strain and responsibility, so he resigned and continued in a comparatively insignificant office throughout his life. He is described by his contemporaries as of very youthful expression and appearance, even in advanced years, mild-eyed, smooth-skinned, and with the complexion of a small child, even when he was very close to 90. We do not know too many details about him. He was a fair scholar, and for his time had to be comparatively literate in order to take care of the copies of the works that came to the monastery. He also began the accumulation of a small library within the monastic structure. He did nothing of an outstanding or extraordinary nature as far as his conduct was concerned. Sometime about 1430 or 40, a little work came into circulation called The Imitation of Christ. This little book, of very obscure origin, has the distinction of having been translated into more languages and have passed through more editions than any other book in the world, with the exception of the Bible. Now, the comparatively small number of persons who know this work today would make it seem impossible that such could have been the case. But second only to the Bible, The Imitation of Christ has been the bestseller of all time. The earliest copies of the work carried no author's name. They were published or issued anonymously and were so copied. And out of this peculiar conflict of circumstances has arisen a literary controversy, a controversy that is far older and has been fought far more enthusiastically or bitterly than the controversy over the authorship of the Shakespearean plays. Ever since the 15th century, efforts have been made to discover who wrote The Imitation of Christ. Early evidence seems to point very strongly toward Thomas à Kempis. And in the course of time, for the average person and the public in general, the controversy died out. But even as late as the present century, it has been stirred again by scholars who have been unable to reconcile this peculiar and extraordinary work with the life of its presumed author. In the course of trying to solve the work, many early manuscripts were consulted, and the authorship problem was not only complicated but confused to chaos by the result. At the present time, there are 15th century or early 16th century manuscripts or early printed editions of The Imitation of Christ, with over 14 different authors given on the title pages. The runner-up, we may say, or the second choice to Thomas à Kempis himself, was a man by the name of John Gerson. Now, John Gerson has been a wonderful subject for study. He has been examined in every way possible, and he has never even been discovered. No one has ever been able to find him. If there is a controversy over the authorship of the book, there is a still greater mystery around the principal claimant, other than à Kempis himself. It is now suspected that this man Gerson was invented, that he never existed at all, but that his name was composed out of abbreviations and notes upon some of the early manuscripts. We do know, however, that even now the authorship of this work is not conclusively assigned to Thomas à Kempis. Therefore, he is the popular candidate at the moment. He seems to retain most of the favor and enthusiasm relating to the book, but efforts to examine and classify early copies and early manuscripts are extremely confusing. And into this confusion has been added certain other factors. Various early religious groups had a great desire to claim this work for themselves. In order to do so, they tried to manufacture authors from their own particular orders, particularly the Benedictines and the Franciscans. So within the cloister itself, quite a tempest arose. It has generally cleared for our thinking now, but the fact remains that the book is totally different from anything known to have been done by Thomas à Kempis. And there is much possibility that he was not the true author. If he was not, it is also possible that the work arose among the remnants of the old Gnostic and heretical sects in Europe, and may even have been spurred into existence by those metaphysical or mystical secret societies who are known to have been just beneath the surface of medieval culture. If we wonder this question, we can also point out some parallels in passing. The famous Shakespearean parallel we do not hardly need to mention. But there is a grave question as to whether More wrote his Utopia, because it is totally different from the man himself. He was a highly progressive, socialistic type of publication, coming from one of the most reactionary men of his time, a man whose personal cruelty is almost beyond description. And yet here is a great idealistic book. Another example is the Robinson Crusoe of Defoe. He is supposed to have written the story in 3 days. There is grave doubt. So with all these works, there can be other possible authors. And nearly all of these controversial books are key books in some part of man's struggle for ethical culture and survival. It is therefore quite possible that they were produced by unknown persons for purposes now obvious, but at the same time, in their own day, it seemed useful for them to remain concealed.